Hey guys, this is Guillermo Puyol with mobileprogrammingtips.com, and today I wanted to do a quick introduction to Mecanim and how to set up your character. This might be a multiple part tutorial, and I'll just take you by the hand as we set a character up. So right now I'm looking at the Earthborn Troll by Sushenki, which is free as of right now in the asset store. So I've already imported a character into my project. So let's go ahead and pull up that character. I have it here. And if you look at the character, it actually has some animations, but it doesn't have an avatar, which is a requirement to work with Mecanim. So that's going to be the first thing that we do. And if we click on the FBX file, you can actually go over to rig, and instead of clicking on legacy, you would select a humanoid, because this is a human type figure, so we'll use humanoid. And then you have the option here to select copy from other avatar or create from this model. So since we don't have another avatar to copy at this point, we'll create it from this model, and we're gonna hit apply. So now we have a check mark, which is a good thing. It means that we're able to create the avatar without a problem. So let's go ahead and take a look. By clicking configure, we'll see the avatar. So we do have to save the scene before we can move on. So I'm gonna go ahead and save. And we'll just call this Mecanim tutorial. Yeah, I'll replace it. And there is our avatar. Okay. You'll notice that you have the basic T pose, and what you want to make sure here is that all these bones are green and everything is mapped correctly. So for example, you want to make sure that the hips are in the correct spot, the spine, the chest, everything is aligned correctly. So in some cases Mecanim might detect this incorrectly, and all you do is, for example, let's say that you grab the left toe on the right toe, and all of a sudden you have something red here. That's a red flag. So there's something that needs to be fixed. So okay, we see obviously the right toe should go here, and now it's back to green. Okay, so that's what you want to set up. And this is a basic rig. You may notice that this actually has additional bones that we are not using in this case, but that's just going to be the basic setup. Okay, so once you have everything green here, you can actually go, and just to give you a little bit more of an idea, you can take a look at the left hand, for example, and you notice that the left hand is also fully rigged. You have the left thumb, so everything is the way it's supposed to be. Okay, so once you have mapped everything from the left side here, from the hierarchy onto Mecanim, you're gonna hit apply, and then you're done. So now you'll notice that under this hierarchy you have the avatar, which is, as I mentioned, a requirement for Mecanim to work. So now we are going to need to take a look at the animations that came with this character. So if you notice, for example, the walk animation, we hit play. I'm sorry, this is going too slow. And it's looping right now, but if you look closely here in the setup, it is not checked for it to loop, and we do want the walk animation to loop. So what you want to do is select the animations that you want looping, and in this case we want idle to loop. So we click it and we hit apply. Idle to, we also want it looping. Walk, want it to loop. Run, we want it to loop. We don't want jump to loop. We don't want him jumping over and over again. So that one doesn't loop. Attack doesn't loop. Hit or die. Okay, so the first four, we want looping. Everything else should be just a one-shot kind of deal. Okay, so that should give us a good start here with the animations. And now let's go ahead and bring the character into the scene. Okay. And I don't think, well, let's go ahead and align the camera to what I'm seeing here. Around there. And it looks like the texture is unlit. Let's see. And give me just 1 second. Okay, so I went ahead and paused it while I changed those shaders, but basically the troll had unlit material, so I just changed them to bump diffuse and I added a directional light just so you can see what I'm doing here. So let's go back to animation. So as of right now, if we were to hit play, nothing is going to happen. And the reason for that is that we don't have an animator set up. Okay, so let's go ahead and set one up. We're going to right click here and we're going to create an animator controller. The animator controller is going to tell our troll what to do. So troll animator is going to be the name. And let's go ahead and click into it. And what we're going to do is set up some states here. So the first state that I like to set up is an idle state. And for this, let's go ahead and select. Just check and see how they look. Okay, we're gonna select idle 1. So we click on it and we drag the animation to the motion. Now we're going to create a new state. And actually, if we were to go into the troll and we drag this animator controller into the animator component and we hit play, now we have a troll that's actually idling. So this by itself is a working setup. If all you want is your characters to have one state, then you can do that and you're done. But typically that's not what people want. You actually want to be able to do some more stuff. So let's go ahead and do a little bit more. So let's create another state. And I do that by right clicking and then selecting empty. So in this state, let's go ahead and select walk. And we're gonna take the walk animation. And let's go ahead and create another state called run. Okay. And that's gonna be good for now. So you need to decide when you're programming what's going to control these different animations. So in my case, I want to control this animation with a parameter, a float parameter called speed. And this is something that I'm naming it. So now we can tell the animator controller to do something when this parameter changes. So we're going to right click idle and make a transition from idle over to walk. So notice that you can't see anything different unless you actually click on the arrow, and now you look at the transition. So let's go ahead and play the transition, and you'll notice here on the little screen that it starts from idle and it starts walking. Starts idling and now it walks. Okay, but as of right now, it's set up with an exit time, meaning that the animation is going to play it for 0.94 and then it's going to go ahead and start playing the next animation, and that's not what we want. We want to control this transition based on a parameter. So let's go ahead and change that to speed. And let's say that anytime that the speed is greater than 0, it should go from idle to walk, because we only want it to idle if the speed is 0. So now we are going to create another one from walk to run, and we want it to run anytime that the speed is, let's say, greater than 2. Okay. So now we have a basic setup, and this is not complete because if we were to execute this, and let's go ahead and execute it, I'm going to say that the speed is 0.1 and it starts walking. If I call this speed, let's say 0, it should have stopped, but we never gave it that order, so it continues to walk. However, if it goes to 4, it starts what they call running. It's the heavy walk, but that's the run animation for this character. Okay, so it's walking. The controller is actually doing what it's supposed to, but now we have to tell it when to transition back. So let's go ahead and do that. And let's create a transition from run down to walk. And in this case, we told it to run anytime that the speed is greater than 2. And we're going to walk anytime that the speed is less than 2. And here, make transition from walk to idle anytime that the speed is less than 0.01, and well, for now we're going to leave that as that. If you were to avoid the character from stopping, if for example you can walk backwards and you're gonna have negative speeds, then you would have to add an additional parameter, but let's go ahead and leave it with less than 0.01 for now. So now we have an idle, and let's call this 0.5. It's walking. Then if we call it 3, then it starts with a heavy run. Then let's go back to 0.2 or 0.3. It transitions back to walk. And if we go to 0, it stops and idles. So now we have those basic transitions working correctly. Now, another type of transition that you can set up is any state. So this any state transition is good for anytime that you have something that should happen regardless of where you are in these different states. So for example, if the player gets killed, it should die regardless of whether it's running, walking, or idling. So let's go ahead and set up another state called die. And we're going to use the die motion. And this is going to be a transition from any state to die. Now, notice that if I wanted to make a transition from die to any state, it would not allow me. And that is by design. Any state, you can transition from any state to a state, but you cannot transition from a state to any state. So that is by design. So if you want to control die, for example, you can select either a trigger or a boolean. So for die, I'm going to select a boolean. So I'm going to select the parameter bool, and I'm going to call it is dead. And I'm going to start with is dead. So now we have set up the boolean here. And if we go to the transition, let's go ahead and play it. Goes from idle to die. Okay, and now we can actually select, instead of the exit time, is dead, and we select that whenever is dead is true, it's going to die. Now I see a little problem here, and we might need to address that in later on, but for just by looking at this animation, it looks like it dies and it's going to be floating in the air when it's dead. Notice that there's a gap. Yeah, it's definitely not touching. So we're gonna have to fix that, and that is something that we can fix. So let's go ahead and select, well actually let's give this scene a ground. And let's make it a plane that's sitting at the 0, 0, 0. And let's make this, okay. And maybe we should even have some hard shadows. Yeah, those are not very nice shadows, but we'll use those for now just so we can see that gap better whenever it falls. So let's go ahead and play this one more time. It's idling right now. Oh my goodness, those shadows are not gonna work. Let's try soft shadows. Yeah, it's gonna be a little bit better. Still not great, but it'll do for now. So it's idling, and when we increase this speed to 1.1, it's walking. If we take the speed all the way to, let's call it 5, it's running. And then let's say that it's running and it gets killed, so is dead is gonna be true, and it dies. And actually it doesn't have the problem that I thought it did. It in fact goes a little bit under the ground, but it seems to be working correctly. And obviously now that it is dead, this speed is completely, it does not have any effect whatsoever. And the reason why it doesn't have any effect is because we haven't set up a transition from here. So let's go ahead and do one more thing just so you can see how you can transition back from, let's say that you went from any state to to somewhere. Let's call this, let's say jump. So let's create a state for jump. Okay, and we're gonna drag this here. Okay, and we're gonna go from any state to jump, and we're gonna call this a trigger. A trigger is similar to a boolean, but it resets itself anytime that the transition is played. So a boolean, for example, die, I used a boolean because once it's dead, and there's nothing you can do about it unless in your game you have some sort of revival mechanism, and then you would, with code, turn that into false. But here you want it to jump, and as soon as it jumps, it goes back to false. And the way to do that is with a trigger. So I created the trigger jump, and I'm going to tell this transition to play anytime that this trigger is triggered. Okay, so notice you don't have an option to say true or false. You just select the trigger, and that's all. But you also want to add, and this is actually over that, you want to add the exit time. So the reason why you want to add the exit time, oh no, I'm sorry, we don't add the exit time here. We're gonna add it later, and I'll show you when. Here you would jump, and then you want to transition back to whether it was running, walking, or idling. So let's go ahead and create those transitions. We're gonna jump, walk, and idle, and of course these transitions are going to be dependent upon the speed. So here we were running anytime that speed is greater than 2. So in this case we want to transition from jump to run anytime that the speed is greater than 2. But notice how I'm leaving this exit time here. And the reason why I'm leaving that is because I want the transition to complete jumping and then transition. If I don't do this, it's going to transition here and immediately go to run because the speed is going to be greater than that. So, and I can show you that in a moment. So let's go ahead and complete this. This transition was anytime that's greater than 0. So here I want it to transition anytime that the speed is greater than 0 and less than 0.01. So anytime that the speed is less than 0.01. Okay, so let's go ahead and try that. Say that I'm idling and I jump, and notice how it jumps, it transitions back to idle, and this trigger is reset. So I'm going to jump again, and it does that. Now let's say that I'm walking, and I'm going to jump, and here we're having a problem where the character is a little bit under the ground. That's definitely something that could be fixed, and I'm just not worried about it right now. But now we do have that jump working, and that the reason why it kind of stops and jumps is because we don't have any blend trees going on, and I'm not going to be setting blend trees into this tutorial. But with a blend tree, you could actually tell Mecanim to blend the animation, the walk and jump animation, so it doesn't completely stop, because notice it jumps and it stops, and then keeps walking. But the basic setup is correct. If we're running, for example, this problem is more noticeable, because when I jump, it almost stops, jumps, and then starts again. Okay, And another problem that I can see right now is that the character is sinking into the ground. If you notice, I believe every time it jumps, it goes a little bit farther down. Let's try that again. Yeah, it's definitely going underground every time that it jumps. It goes farther and farther underground. So let's take a look at the character itself. And let's go to jump. And I'm gonna try to make this a little bit bigger. Okay, so let's go ahead and hit play. Okay, so one thing that we could tell Mecanim is, well, first of all, we want the root transform position to not change. But let me backtrack a little bit. I'm sorry. This is the reason why we're having the problems, because we're applying root motion. If we were not applying root motion, we wouldn't have that problem. So let's try that. I'm gonna make it jump several times. And notice that it does the animation, but it doesn't move up and down. So we need root motion in order for it to jump. So if we were to play this animation and we're controlling the jump with a different type of controller, we wouldn't have this problem. But here, like for example, the character controller, you can set up the character controller to jump and you wouldn't have the problem of it sinking into the ground, because the transform itself is not moving. But since we're not doing that, we're going to go ahead and reapply the root motion, and we're going to fix it through this method. So jump, I'm going to set up a little offset, and I'm just checking a couple things here. Because it's important to look at these average velocities. We have 0.014 on Z. I'm checking to see if there's any offsets in the y-axis. Nothing in Y there. Nothing in Y. Nothing. Okay. So I'm going to set up an offset here, and I'm going to tell it that the root in Y, I want to bake the original into the pose. So let's try that. And what that means is that we don't want it to affect the total outcome. So for example, if it was jumping up onto a stair and that was the animation, you do want it to change the final Y value because you're actually jumping up. But here you're jumping and landing technically on the same spot, so you can bake that Y position into the pose. So let's try that and see if that fixes our problem. Let's keep jumping. And it's not. So we're gonna have to offset it. So because it keeps going down every time. So let's offset this by a little bit. Let's try that. Oh, I'm sorry, was I in the wrong one? No, I wasn't. Okay. This should be 0. I was in the wrong one. Okay, so under jump, you have to make sure that you're selecting the correct animation. I'm offsetting this just by a little bit to see if that's enough of an offset to keep it from sinking under the ground every time it jumps. No, still sinking. Let's try that. Still sinking. It's not looking good. I'm going to tweak it off camera and get back to you with the results. So if we actually look at this character and we select the jump animation, if we have the feet at 0, we'll notice that the toes are actually underground, and the reason for that might be that the bones were actually set up with the toes and we only selected the foot. So let's give it a little bit of an offset. And I had tried -0.6 before, but that was a little bit too much, which was causing the character to actually get higher and higher every time that it jumped. So let's try maybe -3. We'll try that. And let's apply that. And notice that is the feet and it's not baked into the pose. Baked into the pose would actually freeze that offset, which in a jumping animation we don't want. So let's go ahead and try that. And it's looking better. Just want to make sure that we're not having too much or too little of an offset. If I repeat the animation over and over again, it might actually seem that it is getting a little higher every time. So it would need to be tweaked farther. Another thing I noticed is that every time I jump, the character is turning slightly, so it's not almost completely sideways. The reason for that is that it must have a little rotation on the jump, and we can prevent that by going to jump and on the root transform rotation, we want to bake that into the pose. So the body orientation is going to be baked. Hit apply, and then we should not have that rotation. Okay, So now it's obviously not rotating, it doesn't seem to be syncing. So this looks good for now. Obviously, if this was an actual game that's going to be published, you might want to tweak it to make it look perfect so that there's no offset here whatsoever. But that is the basics. Now, if you wanted to control Mecanim through a script, you have to write a script that sets these different parameters here, and I might be able to cover that in the next tutorial, but for now this is the setup for Mecanim, and I hope that you have enjoyed it. I hope that you have learned a little bit about how Mecanim works and how it's set up. Please send me your questions, likes, comments. Follow me on Twitter, mobile prog tip, and I'm on Facebook as well. And please look at the links in the description so you can follow me and ask me questions if you need to, comments, likes, anything that you want. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed it. Have a good night. Bye bye.